Pack your things and get out of my house." My stepfather's voice didn't even shake when he said it. I was standing in the kitchen of the house I'd grown up in, still wearing my scrubs from a double shift, and he said it like he was asking me to take out the trash. My mother stood behind him, arms crossed, refusing to look at me. I was 34 years old, and I'd just been told to leave the only home I'd known since I was 9. "You spend your whole life playing nurse," he said. "And you can't even afford your own apartment. Real doctors don't live with their parents at 34. He said playing nurse, the way other people say playing house. Like it was a costume I put on for fun. I didn't argue. There was nothing to argue. I picked up my car keys, walked to my room, and started packing a suitcase, while my hands were still trembling from 12 hours on a cardiac unit. 3 months later, my stepfather was rushed into the emergency room of the hospital where I worked, and the surgeon who walked into the waiting room to update my mother was me. My name doesn't matter as much as what happened in that house, so I'll just tell you what you need to know. I'm Renata. I was 34, and for the first 30 years of my mother's second marriage, I was the family's quiet disappointment. It hadn't always been that way. When my father died, I was 7. It was just my mother and me for 2 years. And those were good years, even with grief sitting in every room of our small apartment outside Pittsburgh. Then she met Harold. Harold owned 3 car dealerships and a personality that filled up every space he walked into. He had a son from his first marriage, Connor, who was a year older than me. And within 6 months of the wedding, Harold, my mother, Connor and I were living together in a house with a circular driveway and a kitchen island bigger than my old bedroom. Harold believed in exactly one measure of a person's worth, and that was money. Not effort, not character. Money, and the things money could buy, and the people who were impressed by those things. Connor understood this instinctively, the way some kids understand which parent to ask for what. By the time he was 25, Connor had a finance degree, a job at a regional investment firm, and a habit of mentioning his bonus at every single family dinner, whether anyone had asked or not. I went a different direction. I wanted to be a nurse since I was 12 years old, since the night my father was in the hospital, and a nurse named Diane sat with me in the hallway for 40 minutes so I wouldn't be alone while the doctors worked. I never forgot that. I went to nursing school, and somewhere in my second year, an advisor pulled me aside and told me my grades and my hands, steady, careful, fast, were better suited for something bigger. She said the word surgeon, like it was a door swinging open. I walked through it. 8 more years of school after that, residency, a fellowship in cardiothoracic surgery that took me away for 2 years to a hospital in Cleveland. Harold never once asked me what a fellowship was. What he asked every single time I came home was some version of the same question, dressed up differently. Still in school? When do you actually start working? Connor closed a deal last week worth more than your whole tuition. He had no idea what I did. He had no interest in finding out. To him, doctor meant rich. And since I wasn't driving anything nicer than a 10-year-old Honda and still listed my mother's address on my license because I was never in one city long enough to sign a lease, I didn't fit the definition. Assumptions hardened into facts in that house, the way water turns to ice, slowly and then all at once, and nobody noticed the exact moment it happened. The night that ended, everything started out like any other Sunday dinner. My mother had made her pot roast, the one dish that always brought the table back to something resembling peace. Connor's girlfriend was there, a marketing director named Priya, who Harold adored because she worked for a company whose name he recognized. Everything was fine until Priya, trying to be polite, turned to me and asked what I did for work. Before I could answer, Harold laughed, that big, booming laugh that filled the dining room and made the chandelier rattle, or at least it felt that way. "Renata's still finding herself," he said. "She's been in school longer than most people stay married." Connor smirked into his wine glass. My mother studied her plate like there was something fascinating printed on it. I felt my face go hot, but I kept my voice level. "I'm not still in school, Harold. I finished my fellowship 8 months ago. Fellowship for what exactly? He said it like a challenge, like he already knew I couldn't have a real answer. Cardiothoracic surgery. The table went quiet for half a second, and then Harold did something he always did when a fact didn't fit his story. He changed the subject by attacking instead. Must be nice, he said, to spend your 30s playing dress-up in scrubs while your brother's out here closing seven-figure accounts and buying a house. He's not my brother, I said quietly. It slipped out before I could stop it. 32 years in that family, and I had never once called Connor my brother, not even in my head, and apparently that night was the night I finally said it out loud. Harold's face changed. Not embarrassed, furious. Excuse me? I said he's not my brother. We're not related. I've never said it before because it felt rude, but you've spent the last 20 minutes comparing me to a man I share no blood with, in front of his girlfriend, at a dinner my mother cooked, and I'm tired. The silence that followed had a texture to it. Even Priya looked uncomfortable, glancing between her boyfriend and his father like she was watching a car accident she couldn't look away from. My mother finally spoke. Renata, don't start. I'm not starting anything. I'm finishing something. I don't know where the steadiness in my voice came from. Maybe 8 years of staying calm while a patient's heart stopped on a table had finally taught me something useful outside of an operating room. Harold stood up, palms flat on the table, leaning toward me the way he leaned toward salesmen he was about to fire. You live in my house. You eat my food. You drive on my insurance, and you have the nerve to sit at my table and correct me? I do live in your house, I said. Because residency doesn't pay enough to rent in 3 different cities over 6 years, and because every time I tried to save for my own place, you told me it would be a waste since I'd never make real money anyway. So I stayed. I helped Mom. I paid for groceries more times than you know, and I never once asked you for anything beyond a roof. A roof you clearly think you're too good for now, he snapped. Real doctors don't live with their parents at 34, Renata. You want to talk about finishing things? Finish packing. Tonight. My mother's head came up sharply. Harold. No, he said, not even looking at her. I'm done pretending this family has 2 successful children. Pack your things and get out of my house. I want to tell you, I argued, that I made some brilliant case for myself, but I didn't. I looked at my mother, who was staring at her plate again, who would not meet my eyes, who said nothing, while her husband threw her daughter out of the house over a dinner table. And something in me went very quiet and very calm. I stood up. I thanked Priya for her company, which probably confused her more than anything else that happened that night. I walked upstairs, packed 1 suitcase. 8 years of moving for training had taught me how to fit a life into 1 suitcase fast. And I left without saying another word. What none of them knew, because I'd never told them. Because I'd stopped trying to explain my life to people who'd already decided what it was that 2 weeks earlier, I'd accepted a position as an attending cardiothoracic surgeon at Allegheny Cross Medical Center, the largest hospital system in the region. 6-figure salary, the kind of number that would have made Harold's eyes widen if he'd ever bothered to ask. I had also, that same week, signed a lease on a 1-bedroom apartment 15 minutes from the hospital, the first place that would be entirely mine. I just hadn't moved in yet. So that night, I drove to a hotel with my 1 suitcase, and 3 days later, I moved into my own apartment with my own furniture that I'd bought with my own money, and I started my new job at Allegheny Cross. My mother called 4 times that first week. I let it go to voicemail every time, not out of cruelty. I want to be clear about that. But because I genuinely didn't know what I would say, and I'd learned in surgery that sometimes the right move is to wait until your hand stops shaking before you pick up the instrument. I threw myself into work instead. There's a strange mercy in a job that demands everything from you. It doesn't leave much room to sit with heartbreak. My days started at 5 in the morning and didn't end until the last patient was stable. I learned the rhythms of a new hospital, a new team, a new set of nurses, who within the first month started calling me Dr. Vasquez instead of the new attending, which felt like its own kind of homecoming. I was good at my job. I'd always been good at my job. It was the only place where the facts of who I was and what I'd built were never up for debate. 3 months passed. I didn't hear from Harold at all in that time. Not a single call, not a text. My mother and I exchanged a handful of stiff messages, mostly about logistics. Could I come get the rest of my things from the garage? Did I want my old bed frame? Polite. Cold. The kind of communication that happens between people who used to know each other. Then, on a Tuesday in October, I was finishing rounds on the cardiac floor when my pager went off for an incoming trauma. Severe chest pain, possible myocardial infarction, male patient, 61 years old, arriving by ambulance in 11 minutes. Routine, in the sense that nothing about a heart attack is ever really routine. But the kind of case I handled 3 or 4 times a week. I met the ambulance at the bay doors like I always did. The paramedics were already talking in that fast, clipped shorthand they use, vitals and timeline, and what they'd given him in transit, and I was listening, scanning the chart on the gurney, when I looked up at the patient's face for the first time. It was Harold. He was gray. Not pale. Gray, the color a person turns when their heart isn't moving enough blood, and there was real fear in his eyes, the kind I'd seen 1,000 times on 1,000 strangers, but never once on him. He looked at me, and for a second I don't think he understood what he was seeing. Then his mouth moved, and the only word that came out was my name. Renata? I need you to stay calm, I said, and my voice came out exactly the way it always did in a trauma. Level, clear, professional. The voice that has nothing to do with whoever the patient happens to be. You're having a cardiac event. We're going to take care of you. I will tell you honestly that for about 4 seconds, every cell in my body wanted to walk away and let another surgeon take the case. 4 seconds. And then the part of me that had spent 8 years training to save lives, regardless of whose life it was, took over completely. And I stopped seeing Harold, the man who threw me out of his house, and started seeing a patient in acute distress whose left anterior descending artery, based on the EKG already being relayed to me, was almost certainly blocked. We're going straight to the cath lab, I told the team, already moving. Get cardiology on standby for a possible bypass. Call the OR. Tell them we may need to convert. Harold grabbed my sleeve as they wheeled him through the doors, his grip weaker than I'd ever felt it. His big, booming voice reduced to something thin and scared. Are you going to be the one operating on me? I looked down at him, this man who had spent 30 years measuring me against a yardstick he'd never let me see, who had called me a child playing dress-up 4 hours before he turned out to need exactly the kind of doctor he didn't believe I was. Yes, I said. If it comes to surgery, it's going to be me. You're in the right hands, Harold. I promise you that. The angiogram confirmed what we suspected. A near-total blockage in his LAD, the artery cardiologists sometimes call the widowmaker for a reason. The interventional team tried to place a stent first, the less invasive option. But the blockage was positioned in a way that made it too risky to clear that route alone. Within 40 minutes, I was scrubbing in for emergency bypass surgery on the man who'd told me real doctors don't live with their parents. I called my mother myself from the scrub sink because I didn't think anyone else should be the one to tell her. Mom, it's me. Harold had a heart attack. He's at Allegheny Cross. I'm about to operate. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, long enough that I thought the call had dropped, and then I heard her voice break completely. You're operating on him? I'm the surgeon on call for this case. I'm the best person in this building to do it, and that's not arrogance. That's just true. He's stable enough for surgery. I need you to drive here, but drive safely. I'll have someone meet you at the front desk. The surgery took just under 4 hours. A triple bypass, more involved than the initial scans had suggested, with one section of grafting tighter and more delicate than I'd have liked, the kind of moment where you forget every single thing in your life except the 6 inches of exposed heart in front of you. I don't remember thinking about Harold, the person at all during those 4 hours. I remember thinking about flow rates and graft placement and the particular stubbornness of scar tissue from a surgery he'd apparently had on his knee years ago that had nothing to do with his heart, but somehow made the chest retraction trickier. Surgery has a way of erasing everything except the problem in front of you, and I am endlessly grateful for that mercy. When I walked out of the OR, a little after 1 in the morning, still in my scrub cap, I found my mother in the surgical waiting room, sitting in one of those stiff vinyl chairs with her coat still on, like she hadn't been able to make herself settle in. She stood up the second she saw me, and her whole face was a question she didn't have the words for. "He's stable," I said. "The surgery went well. We grafted 3 vessels. He's in recovery now, and if everything continues the way it's trending, he should be able to go home in 5 to 7 days, with a long road of cardiac rehab after that." My mother's legs seemed to give a little, and she sat back down hard, both hands pressed over her mouth. I sat in the chair next to her, still in my scrubs, and for a long moment neither of us said anything. "You saved his life," she finally said. "I did my job, Renata." She turned to face me fully then, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. Not pride, not yet, something more like the beginning of understanding. "You could have let someone else take the case. Nobody would have blamed you. I would have blamed me," I said. "That's not how this works, Mom. You don't get to pick who deserves to live." She started crying then, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere much older than tonight, and she reached for my hand the way she used to when I was small and scared in hospital hallways. Except now our positions had reversed completely, and I was the one in scrubs, and she was the one who needed steadying. "I should have said something that night," she whispered. "At dinner. When he told you to leave, I just sat there. I've sat there my whole marriage." "Yeah," I said. I wasn't going to pretend that didn't matter. Not even now, not even with Harold's heart still healing 2 floors above us. "You did." Harold woke up around 6 the next morning, and I was the one who checked on him first, the way I check on every patient I operate on, regardless of what came before. He was groggy, still tethered to monitors, but his eyes found mine and stayed there. "You operated on me," he said. His voice was hoarse from the breathing tube. I remember asking. "You said yes." "I did." He was quiet for a long moment, processing something, the kind of processing I imagine a person does when their entire framework for understanding their own life cracks open in one night. "I told you to get out of my house," he said. "I told you real doctors don't live with their parents. And then you spent 4 hours with your hands inside my chest, fixing what I broke myself." "You didn't break your own heart on purpose, Harold. Lifestyle and stress did most of that work." "But yes, that's roughly the situation." His eyes were wet, and I don't think I'd ever seen Harold cry. Not once, not at his own father's funeral, not at his wedding to my mother. "Why?" he asked. "After everything I said to you, why would you do that for me?" I thought about the easy answer. Because it's my job. Because that's what doctors do. Because the Hippocratic Oath doesn't have an exception clause for men who insulted you at a dinner table. All of that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth, and I figured if there was ever a moment to tell him the whole truth, it was this one, with him still hooked to a heart monitor and unable to interrupt me. "Because somewhere along the way," I said, "I stopped needing you to be proud of me before I could be proud of myself. I built a career you never once asked about, because I loved it, not because I needed you to validate it. So when you came through those doors gray and scared, the only thing left in me was the part that knows how to save a life. There wasn't room for 30 years of feeling small. There was just a patient who needed help, and I happened to be the surgeon who could give it to him." Harold didn't say anything for a while. Then, in a voice I'd genuinely never heard him use before, quiet, stripped of all its usual bluster, he said, "I was wrong about you. I was wrong for a long time, and I think some part of me knew it and kept doubling down anyway, because admitting it meant admitting I'd been a fool for years. I'm sorry, Renata. I don't expect that to undo anything, but I'm sorry." "I appreciate that," I said, and I meant it, even though I also understood, with total clarity, that an apology delivered from a hospital bed 4 hours after open-heart surgery doesn't erase 30 years of being told you're not enough. It just opens a door. What happens on the other side of that door is still being decided. Connor showed up later that afternoon, ashen-faced from the drive. And when he found out I was the one who'd operated, he didn't say much at first. Just stood in the doorway of his father's room, staring at me like he was recalculating something. Later, in the hallway, he caught up to me as I was leaving for the night. "I didn't know," he said, "about the fellowship. The surgery stuff. We never asked. None of us asked." "No," I agreed. "You didn't. I'm not going to pretend I was kind to you growing up. I wasn't. I liked being the one Dad bragged about. It was easier than examining why he never did the same for you." He rubbed the back of his neck, looking younger suddenly than his 35 years. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you were the one in that operating room today. I don't think anyone else would have fought for him the way you did, considering." "I didn't fight for him because of who he is to me," I said. "I fought for him because that's what I do for everyone who comes through those doors. But I appreciate you saying it." Harold's recovery took the better part of 2 months. I wasn't his primary care surgeon for the follow-up visits. There are rules about treating family, and I made sure another cardiothoracic colleague took over his outpatient care, which felt like the right kind of boundary, the kind that says, "I will save your life, but I am not obligated to also manage the rest of our relationship inside an exam room." My mother visited me at my apartment for the first time about 3 weeks after the surgery, sitting at my small kitchen table, looking around at the life I'd built without either of them watching. "It's a good apartment," she said, like she was surprised. "It's really nice, Renata. I bought the furniture myself, saved for 2 years for the dining table. I didn't know that." She looked down at her hands. I didn't know a lot of things, it turns out. I didn't rush to comfort her. I'd learned, somewhere in the last few months, that you can hold space for someone's regret without immediately absolving them of it. "You didn't ask," I said, echoing what I'd told Connor. "For 30 years, nobody in that house asked me a single real question about my life. You just decided what my life was. And then you reacted to the version you'd invented instead of the one that actually existed." "I'm asking now," she said quietly. So I told her about the night my father died and the nurse named Diane who sat with me. About the fellowship in Cleveland, the worst on-call rotation of my life. The first time I closed a chest by myself and walked outside afterward and cried in my car from sheer relief. About all of it. 6 years of training she'd never once asked about. Condensed into one long evening at my kitchen table. While she listened the way I think she should have been listening for the last decade. Harold and I have what I'd call a careful peace now, not a resolution, not some tidy reconciliation, where everything from before gets erased. He still calls occasionally, usually with some version of an update on his cardiac rehab, sometimes just to talk. And there's a humility in his voice now that wasn't there before. The kind that comes from waking up with someone else's hands having just been inside your chest. He doesn't ask about my salary anymore. He asks about my patience. It's a small thing, but it's not nothing. I moved my mother's old bed frame out of the garage about a month after that kitchen table conversation. Finally, the last physical tie to that house. I didn't need it anymore. I'd bought a real bed for my real apartment, the one I'd been paying for entirely on my own since long before the night Harold told me to leave. People ask me sometimes, mostly other surgeons, mostly late at night during a long shift, how I managed to operate on a man who'd thrown me out of his house 90 days earlier. I tell them the truth, which is that it wasn't hard in the moment, because in the moment there was no Harold, the stepfather, who never once asked about my life. There was only a patient in front of me whose heart needed fixing, and that patient deserved my full skill regardless of history. The hard part came after, in the quiet, in deciding what to do with 30 years of being told I wasn't enough. Now that the man who'd told me that owed me his life. I decided, in the end, that I didn't need him to understand what I'd built in order for it to matter. I'd already understood it myself, long before he ever did. The surgery wasn't the moment I proved anything to Harold. The moment I proved something was years earlier, alone in a hospital in Cleveland, closing a chest with steady hands. Nobody in my family had bothered to watch me develop. Saving his life didn't give me back those 30 years. But it did something else, something I hadn't expected. It let me close the door on needing his approval at all. Gently, the way you close a door on a room you've already moved out of.